Thank you, Dr. Shamsuri. And thank you, Minister, and thank you, MENDAKI and IPS for having me here. So I'll be, just to check if my audio is okay. Yeah?
Yes, fine.
Okay, fine. I'll be speaking today about how educational practices can promote resilience and provide positive pathways from childhood to adulthood. I only have about 10 minutes or so I'll draw just from a couple of practices and just touch the surface. And each slide could potentially be a series of workshops on its own, actually. So let's begin with the first slide. Let me begin with resilience. Next slide, please. So resilience. Resilience is the ability to withstand, adapt, recover, or grow in response to trauma, adversity, or stress, right? So it involves behaviors, thoughts, actions that can be learned and developed in anyone at any stage of learning and life. Resilience is a skill that can be built and honed over time. But resilience has many faces. It's multidimensional and it looks different in different people. And so is trauma. Trauma has many faces too. Trauma can be acute, for example, resulting from a single stressful, dangerous event. It could be chronic, resulting from repeated or prolonged exposure to highly stressful events, or complex, resulting from multiple different traumatic events. Now, what does trauma look like? What can trauma look like in a classroom? So in a classroom, it can look like a student who may appear withdrawn or even shy or overly sensitive. The student facing anxiety. It could be a student who's distracted, thinking about something else that could be happening outside of school, at home, for example. It could be a student on a short fuse, being aggressive, appearing aggressive to the teacher, or it could be a student who has language deficits or executive function deficits, for example, having trouble planning, organizing, or solving problems. Okay, so why trauma-informed practices? So trauma-informed practices has been found to cultivate lasting resilience, right? How it attempts to recognize these many faces and risk factors such as hardships, peer victimization, bullying, even violence and racism. And from racism, I mean from microaggressions that you face every day, the everyday racism, to even explicit, implicit, systemic racism. Okay, but recognizing these factors does not mean we focus on the deficits. Rather, trauma-informed practices means that we meet the student's trauma with a strength-based approach. Right? So Bessel van der Kolk, in his influential book on trauma called The Body Keeps Score, right? He calls for schools to not only be seen as academic centers, but also as places where children are truly seen and known, and where they can learn self-regulation, resilience strategies, and where they can develop a sense of self-agency. So at their best, he writes, schools can function as islands of safety in a chaotic, uncertain world, right? Which is a world we basically live in right now. And for students to thrive and be their best selves. So how do we create these islands of safety, right? So first we need to create a safe space. We need to establish predictability, build connected relationships, right? This helps create a sense of trust. We need to model power with, not power over relationships. For example, like giving students choices. We need to build social, emotional resiliency skills. We'll talk about this later on. And to stay in the resiliency zone, which can be attained through a whole child restorative practice. And again, I'll speak a little bit about this later on. So when done right, trauma-informed practices can cultivate lasting resilience and success. Now let's talk about relationships. Next slide, please. All right, so the quality of your relationships influences how resilient you can be. Right? Relationships are very important in building resilience. There are many ways to build strong, positive relationships, and I'll discuss a few ways today here. The first is to hold a space for each other, right? Holding space can look and mean different things to different people, okay? But I find it's defined beautifully by Heather Platt at Uplift. Uplift is a global media channel that aims to inspire positive change around the world. Anyway, she says, what does it mean to hold space for someone? She says, it means holding space for someone means that we are walking alongside another person in whatever journey they're on without judging them, without making them feel inadequate, without trying to fix them, or trying to impact the outcome. All right? So when we hold space for the other person, we open our hearts, offer unconditional support, and let go of judgment and control. Sometimes we find ourselves holding space for people while they hold space for others. It's virtually impossible to be a strong space holder unless we have others who will hold the space for us. Yeah? So even the strongest leaders sometimes need to know that there are some people with whom they can be vulnerable and weak without fear of being judged. So therefore, why do I say this? Therefore, holding space is not just for students, but for teachers too. Yeah. So teachers too need the emotional support of educators, principals, anyone. They need the support and space so that they can be effective advocates for students. Yeah. So we need to take the time out of our busy schedules to do just that. So second, I say mind your language. In building and drawing on the strengths of the students using our strength-based approach, the language we use is very important. Our words matter. Language holds power. Yeah? And the way we communicate with the child, the words we use, how we use them, the tone that we use, it can all make a lasting difference in the way the child sees himself or herself. Okay? Stigmatizing language perpetuates negative perceptions, and trauma-sensitive language means no labels, no judgment, and this is very important, no jargon, because jargon makes someone feels that, oh, they don't know something, yeah, when it's unnecessary. And so not only is it important for teachers to model positive language, but students should also be practicing it on a daily basis and having students reflect on their language to identify words that have negative connotations will allow them to become more aware of the impact of their language on themselves and on others. This also ties in with building empathy and also perspective taking, which we will talk about in a bit. The third is to encourage student voice and choice. This is to do with the power with strategy rather than power over. Yeah? And how do we do that? First, we allow students to make decisions regarding what they learn or how the classroom should look like, feel, or run, right? So it shows the students you respect them and that their thoughts and ideas are valuable. Second, when students make decisions with their peers and teachers, they feel that they are part of a community and that they have contributed something important. So this way, they get more emotionally invested and are more likely to hold themselves accountable, to follow through with any class obligations that they have. Third is to encourage students to make their own choices as it gives them a sense of purpose. So I'm sure we will all agree that the goal of education should be to empower students to pursue their own interests and further their own knowledge. So when students are able to make choices about their education, they are empowered to explore issues that they find important and meaningful. And they can continue this work ethic throughout their lives. Yeah. So relationship building is important, and it's also part of social emotional learning, which we will talk about next. Next slide, please. So social emotional skills, this I know has been happening quite a bit in Singapore, the SEL, social emotional learning. So SEL can build resiliency, especially during these uncertain times, right? And there are 5 main competent areas of competence in developing social emotional skills. The first one is self-awareness, which involves identifying emotions and accurate self-perceptions. Regular self-reflection can help you identify feelings of discomfort and find ways through them without bottling it up. Yeah, too much, and seek help. Self-management includes managing stress and controlling impulses, which includes aspects of your executive function. This may include setting, maintaining boundaries. There's social awareness, which entails perspective taking and empathy, appreciation for diversity as well. This is a very important skill needed to build a community of care. Okay. And then relationship skills. We've established that the quality of relationships influences how resilient you can be, right? So strong, positive relationships can help you get through tough and challenging times. Responsible decision-making focuses on skills like identifying problems, evaluating, reflecting, and acting with consideration for the well-being of others. Yeah. So the concept of ethical decision-making and responsibility is closely tied to the other components. For example, to do the right thing by standing up to friends who are mistreating others, a student needs to be in touch with their own values, so awareness. They also need to empathize with those affected, social awareness, and resist peer pressure to join in, so relationship skills. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip to the next slide and my final slide, restorative practice. So this is a whole school approach, which means it considers relationships, interconnections in and out of school, right? It's based on the foundation of social connectedness, respect, safety, and communication. Restorative practice commits to building a culture of care in schools that can be carried over to the communities, all right? And the aim is to build, maintain, and restore relationships and doing right by others, right? There are 9 interconnected parts here. So this is more of the whole is larger than the sum of the parts, okay? It leads to the well-being of the student. And this framework, the restorative practice framework, provides a piece-by-piece guide to cultivating caring and healthy communities in which a child can thrive and build and strengthen their resilience. All right. So if I can just summarize, I can see, as you can see here, the elements within the different practices we've glanced quickly over today overlap with one another. Right. So commonly, these practices cultivate and enhance lasting resilience. This talk has been about the what and to some extent the how of educational practices. But if I may, and if I try to talk very quickly, I'd like to quickly talk about the why. Okay, why trauma-informed practice? Why restorative practice? Well, unfortunately, the experience of trauma and hardships is not uncommon, okay, in Singapore or around the world, especially in these times, and especially among those who experience hardships, inequity, and inequality, in some form of which were alluded to in the video that we just saw just now. So developing strong support systems are central to one's resilience, right? Arming yourself with skills that build strong resilience could help you be more resourceful in overcoming these risk factors. But at the same time, it is important that we don't allow this narrative around building resilience to obscure the wider causes of inequities that needs to be addressed, right? But good news is that these educational practices not only build lasting resilience, which is good, it could also integrate social justice education as an initial step forward in addressing issues such as inequality, these hardships people face, and also foster inclusivity. Right. So as we advocate for positive pathways for our children to resiliently forge through, we look to these educational practices to build, maintain, restore a community of care and support, and for an inclusive and equitable future that we and all our children deserve. Thank you and stay safe.